For this walkthrough, we'll be blocking out a vanilla feline quadruped walk cycle, and it will be a static walk cycle, meaning that the character will not move in this Z translation right here, or X, but rather in place. Now this rig that we're using is called Houdini, and you can find it on creativeclash.com. There's a version 1.1. I modified this particular rig to have an extra control on the master control here where I could hide the tail altogether. There are visibility options down here in the layer channels, but I wanted the option to just quick turn off and on the geometry and the controls of the tail. Now when it comes to animating a quadruped, it's good, as with all animations, to kind of set up your character. So felines in particular, what I find useful is to kind of lower the front chest, raise the back hips a little bit, and maybe even rotate them both forward just a little bit. That kind of gives a sense of kind of that ready to walk, ready to pounce energy that cats tend to have. Also, you'll notice that these feet are evenly spaced apart, which is pretty typical for rigs, but if you look at feline reference, they tend to walk very much in line with each other. If you do a Google search for catwalk, you'll see what I'm talking about. So I like to bring in both feet, let's say 0.15. The numbers really don't have to be super accurate, but I'll do that just for my own sake. And then I like to rotate these feet outward a little bit, let's say 8 degrees or so. Once again, you don't have to follow those numbers exactly. But now just these front legs, you can already see the paws look a little more natural. Perhaps you might need to bring these knee controls back inward a little bit. And then we'll do kind of the same thing with the back legs. So we'll bring the back legs in not quite as much, so maybe more like 0.1 rather than 0.15. And I'm not going to rotate these back legs because they're a little less flexible. Cats tend to not really play with their back paws in the same way that they play with their front paws. It's mostly used for kicking, jumping, scratching, rather than grabbing and attacking in the same way. Alright, so before I hide the tail, I'm also going to pose it just so I can kind of have a generic kind of cat shape. So I'm going to rotate this tail up altogether, and then I will highlight the first half of the tail, and I'll rotate it up even more, and then the section that I didn't highlight before I'll select and rotate in the opposite direction like this. And I find that's kind of a generic looking kind of cat pose. If you want, you can spend more time kind of shaping it from different angles if you'd like, because cats' tails seem to have a mind of their own, so sometimes you might want to rotate it in multiple axes, something like that. But seeing as we're not going to really animate the tail in this blocking stage, once we kind of get it posed off, I'm just going to hide it. Actually, before I do that, I will select the entire character, go to frame 1, and hit S to make sure that I've got a keyframe on everything. Then I'll hide the tail. Also make sure my auto key is turned on, and then under my animation preferences, I'm set to 24 frames per second, and clamped for the in tangents, stepped for the out tangents. That's how I like to work when I'm in blocking. Alright, so there's a few important things to think about when you're doing a quadruped walk cycle, and this pretty much applies to the vast majority of quadrupeds, dogs, cats, horses, etc., is that there's a pretty good pattern to base the footfalls on, and that would be this pattern right here. Now take a minute to study this and kind of see if you can understand what it means. Each of these drawings here, 1, 2, 3 through 8, are the poses for each of the steps. When the front legs are in a passing and a contact, and when the back legs are in a passing and a contact. So you'll see that when the left front leg is down and the right front leg is up, that's the passing pose. So if you were to think of like a basic walk cycle, that's when the character's got their foot down and then one foot is up like this. That's kind of the idea right here. And then the back legs would be in the contact pose, more or less, where the feet are both just contacting the ground. And then you'll have kind of not so much a passing for both legs, but more of an extreme up and an extreme down, or an extreme up and a pass. So I highly recommend to study this diagram, and then also to check out some video reference. Video reference is extremely useful. As we watch this cat, we can see that the shoulders kind of lead the movement in the front paws, and there's lots of good bobbing up and down. And this video right here is really good for seeing kind of the patterns, and it's difficult on YouTube in particular to kind of pause and really see what's going on, although you can pause and push the period and comma button and go frame by frame, which I believe might be a new feature. So I would recommend doing that, and you can kind of get an idea. And one thing that I really want to point out, I've seen a lot of quadruped walk cycles where we see like 2 sets of legs, which obviously cats have, but I've seen where they've got the front legs, or the front legs and the back legs both doing independent walk cycles, and as the left leg goes forward in the front, the back right leg goes forward at the exact same time. Now this might seem right in the sense of you're like, well, of course both right side and both left side aren't going to go at the same time. That would look really, really awkward for a quadruped to walk that way, and that's true. But if we watch this reference here, you'll notice that as we come up on, take a look at this front right paw there, the foreleg. As it gets ready to go forward, that back hind leg, the right one, is kind of pushing it forward, if you think of it that way. So right as the front right one is about to leave the ground, the back right one is about to touch the ground, and the spacing behind it is rather fascinating, I think. So you'll notice that there's no exact copycat pattern where when the right leg goes forward, the back left leg goes forward at the exact same time. It's quite a well-oiled machine. So let's just jump right in and start making some of those poses, and feel free to follow along at your own pace. So I'm going to focus on the back hind legs first, and I'm going to do this in kind of a layered approach where I will pose the up and down movement in the hips and then the steps in the hind legs, and I'll do that frame 1 through, this will be a 24 frame walk cycle, so put it on, set this to 25 frames. And then once I'm finished with the back legs, I'll add in the shoulder up and down, the foreleg poses, and then I'll go through one more time and kind of edit the bobbing in the head and some movement in the midsection here to kind of bring it all together. And then if we have time, maybe we'll add in a little bit of tail animation. So I'm going to start off with the hind legs in the contact position. So what that means is that if you've ever done a typical walk cycle, once again, where both feet are kind of just barely touching the ground. So I'll start with the hips here, and they're already translated down pretty good. I'll just leave it at that. Seem to have a rotation Z. Oh yeah, because I want it to rotate down. Right, so I'll leave it at that. But I'm also going to add some rotate Y here, because the feet are going to be dragging behind in one direction. So since I'm going to make this left hind leg go back, I'll add a little bit of rotation Y here, let's say 5 or 6. And then I will translate this foot back. That's once again, you don't have to follow these numbers exactly, but I'll type in like -0.3 and bring this front leg forward a little bit. Let's offset that and do +0.3. And since this is a contact, I'm also going to have this paw here rotated a bit. And this paw here, think of this as a foot roll. Many rigs have a foot roll control. That's this little circular ring around the toes. And I'll type in like -25 or something. Alright, so that's pretty much our contact, more or less. And since this is going to be a full walk cycle, I can select this. I can pretty much select the whole thing, and on frame 1 I can middle mouse, drag all the way to 25, hit S. We'll do that again later, obviously, because I haven't finished the front pass, but there you go. And then I'm also going to work kind of at major key poses. So since we're going to do this in blocking stepped mode, I'm going to have my main keyframes, my extremes, etc. are going to be every 3 frames, so the 1, 4, 7, 10, 13, 16, etc. So 13 is our halfway point, which means that these legs will be still in the contact, but in the complete opposite direction. So I can highlight my hips here, and I can type in, let's see if at 1 it was, let's make it 6, and then 13, -6. And I'll grab these feet and I'll make them opposite of what they were, so +3, this one will be -0.3, and then obviously I need to do the paw rotation, 0 out the back one, and add some to this one. Simple as that. So now we've got our contacts. Our next major breakdown is going to be the passing pose, which will be halfway in between the 2 contact poses. So here at frame 7. So I'll select the hip controls, and I'm going to pretty much 0 out that rotate Y. But I'll keep the height, let's say, about the same, because it hasn't really translated down or up other than in the 2 extremes that we'll get to momentarily. But this foot here, this red foot, it's going to be halfway, also translated halfway between the 2 contact poses. So between 3 and -3, which is going to be 0'd out pretty much. And then we also need to 0 out this paw roll. The main pose we have to make here, of course, is this passing foot. And one thing that's really important for cats in particular is to kind of have this paw drag back really well. So I'm going to rotate this, I'll say -75. We're also obviously going to need to figure out how we want to position this. So I'll raise it up by, that looks pretty good maybe. It helps to go into your side view often. And figure out your silhouette here. So one thing I've noticed with cat spacing as they walk is that the feet tend to drag back and then pop forward. So what I mean by that is if we were to track the foot as it's kind of taking a step and swinging forward, is that it would take a step and it would hang back here pretty good, and then it would kind of jump up here before it slows down. So for this passing pose, even though it's halfway in between the two contacts, I'm not going to translate it halfway. I'm going to kind of favor it hanging back here. I'm also going to make sure to select the toe control and really rotate that even more to really get a good strong drag, maybe 35 degrees, give or take. And if you want, you can kind of add some rotation outward, or twisting it in different directions to add character. If you want just kind of a straight on vanilla walk cycle, then you can leave most of those rotations zeroed out. I might add a little bit in just because it's a habit to kind of give each pose a little bit of character, even if it's pretty rough. So there's our passing pose in the back. I'll select those keyframes and make sure I hit S, select the controls rather. Next, our two breakdowns are going to be the extreme up and the extreme down in the hips, similar to our basic human walk cycles. So I'll start on the down first, which will be on pose or on frame 4. And this toe obviously will be zeroed out because that foot will have been planted, and the translation of it will be, let's say, halfway between 1 and 7, so 0.15. That foot's done. Oh, we also need to do the hips, obviously. So this is the extreme down, so the hips are going to be rotated, well, down, obviously. So this will be the lowest that the hips ever go. Let's say negative 0.05 or so. There's not really a whole lot of crazy up and down movement for kind of your typical vanilla quadruped walk cycle. For cats, there's a lot of shoulder movement, but we'll get to there in a bit. I'm also going to have this rotation in the Y just start. So it was at 0, and then at 4 it should be, let's say, 5. Kind of irrelevant what you put on there, but I like to have nice round even numbers. Okay, so now this blue foot is just going to barely start to translate back a little bit. Let's say negative 0.4. So now if we thumb through this, we've got our, let's go to our side view. We've got our contact, our down, and then our passing, and then contact again. So now we've got to do our up, which is going to be on frame 10. So I'll highlight all these controls, hit S, make sure to go back to frame 4 and hit S as well. But on frame 10, it's going to be our extreme up. So this foot here is pretty much going to be halfway in between 7 and 13. So negative 0.15. That's it for that. This hip will obviously be translated as high as we ever have it go. So let's do whatever the opposite of 4 was. So let's do negative or positive 0.05, maybe 0.6. And the rotate Y will have been zeroed out on the passing and negative 6 on the contact, which it looks like I didn't set my keyframe on the contact by accident. So always make sure to select your controls and set your keyframes. So that rotate Y will be negative 3. I'm going to jump to my frame 13 here and make sure I pose this foot properly, because you'll notice I didn't actually set the keyframes. There's a quick thing that you can do, is if you select one of these. So for instance, I'll highlight this red control and then shift highlight the circle, and I'll right click down here and say copy. I'll go to frame 13 and I'll highlight the blue square and the blue circle, go down here, right click, paste, paste. Now it's got the exact same numbers as that. Obviously it's translated too far out, so go to this, type in positive 0.1, and there we go. So I'll select all those on frame 13, hit S, go back to my frame 10, where I was going for the extreme up. Now this foot here that was passing is now swinging forward pretty good. So I'm going to bring that pretty far forward. We'll say -0.05. Once again, don't have to follow these numbers exactly, it's just kind of a very rough estimate. And the translate, it'll be on its way down a little bit, just a little bit, because it's kind of making an arc. And the rotation will be increased because we want that paw to really drag. So I'll add some more in the paw here. And there's some weird popping going on, but I'll just kind of eyeball it. I won't worry about the numbers too much. Alright, and there we go. So if we go to our side view, and let me reposition this, just kind of, maybe it will go up. Yeah, okay. So, we'll thumb through this. We got contact, down, passing, up, contact. And then, as I did earlier, we can copy and paste those positions for the rest and just change up the numbers that need to be negative or positive. So we got to do the down for the other foot, which will be on frame 16 here. So I'll select all these back controls, hit S on 16, but then I'm going to go to frame 4, middle mouse drag that to 16 and hit S. But we just need to basically reverse all these numbers. So this down here, rotate Y will be -5 on the hips. And then this foot here will be -0.15. This foot here will be, actually no, it'll be whatever this foot is. So that foot was -0.4. And this foot will be whatever this foot was there, 0.15. And if you don't want to do the copy and pasting, you can just kind of manually put it in. So I'll select all those back controls, go to my next frame at 19, hit S to make sure it's all figured out, and the 19 is going to be the passing pose for the opposite foot. So you can always jump to 7 to get reference. So at 7, this foot was at, it was pretty much zeroed out, so I can go to 19 and zero out the other foot. If I go to 7 and I look at this one, I can say, okay, it's rotated like whatever, and it's -0.376, but I'll go to 19 and I'll just kind of manually put it in. Make sure to rotate this paw back really well too. You can always compare it. Just kind of flip back and forth. That looks pretty good. But as I mentioned, I like to add a little bit of rotation in these directions here. And we'll definitely do that in the front paws. It's really important in the front paws. The back paws you can get away without it for just kind of a simple, rough walk cycle. Right, and then our final pose is going to be on 22. That's going to be the extreme up. So I'll select all these back controls, go to 22 and hit S. And I can compare it to frame 10. where I can say, okay, this foot was translated -0.15, go to this one, -0.15. The hips were translated up 0.06 and rotated y -3, so they'll be +3 because it's the opposite direction. And this foot, we need to swing forward, rotate even more, maybe rotate it toward the camera a little better, just compare it to 10. Alright, so now we got our back feet pretty much blocked out. If you hit play, you should be able to watch kind of the whole system, and it should make sense. And if you see any weird hiccups, just double check in multiple views. Make sure that this back hip is rotating properly and that the feet make sense. And the feet do seem kind of far apart, and typically we would want to see the feet kind of start here and then rotate out and land here, and then the feet would just kind of follow this type of pattern off into the distance. But for this blocking, we won't worry about that because we can always go into the graph editor and just tell it to kind of translate in for the entire thing. Alright, so that's the back paws blocked. I'm going to now work on the front paws. Now the front paws, the forelegs, we need to pay attention to the shoulders here. So on this rig we luckily have options to control the shoulders, and you can translate them or you can rotate them. I actually will translate because I think for this rig it's a little easier to define. And you can spend time researching feline anatomy and figuring out how the shoulders work, but for now we're just going to kind of rough in what looks good and what matches our reference best. So we'll back up to frame 1 here, and when the back hips are in the extreme down, the front shoulders will be in the extreme up, and vice versa. And what that means is that when the back legs are in their contact position, the front legs will be in their passing position, and vice versa. So what we end up seeing is a series of poses, if you follow this diagram, where pretty much there's only ever 2 or 3 paws on the ground at any given moment. So unless your animal stops to look at something, or they're really slow and fat, or have a weird personality, typically you can always count on at least 1 foot being in the air at all times. So on this first pose, since our back legs are in their contact, the front legs will be in their passing position. So I'll start with this front, the shoulders here, and the translate Y I'll just leave. You know what, maybe that won't be translated quite as high as I originally had it. That's fine. Alright, so for the passing, we'll start off by having the blue foot halfway in between, which, you know what, it's pretty much in the right spot here, so let's just go ahead and leave it there. I might bring this in more though, maybe 0.2, and this one -0.2, just so those feet are really close together. And as I mentioned before, the back legs, I'd probably do the same, bring them in a little bit closer. Alright, the main pose here is going to be this front paw, this front right paw rather. So it's going to be similar to if you go to your frame 7. That's kind of the general pose you're going to be making. So we'll translate this back like -0.3, just kind of following the pattern that I've been setting for myself. I'll translate it up by I don't know, 0.4. Just kind of roughly estimating, doesn't have to be exact. I'll rotate it forward, obviously, by quite a bit. Let's say -5-ish. And then this toe would be the big rotation. Let's say like -80 or something. And as I was mentioning earlier in the video, we really want to make sure that this foot kind of has some really good character to it. So feel free to experiment. I'm going to pose mine roughly like that. If you want to copy those exact numbers, feel free. I'm just eyeballing it. Sometimes I like to say, okay, that's 15, that's 18, that's -50, whatever, just so you can have a nice round even number. Sometimes I don't care as much. So now that we kind of have, you know what, for frame 1 we might as well just pose the rest of the body. So this middle section is going to kind of go up and down eventually to kind of counteract the middle section, or to kind of counteract the other legs, but it's going to be zeroed out during this pose. And the head will probably be zeroed out as well for the contact/passing poses, but a good rule of thumb is that it'll kind of follow the up and down movement of the back, while if the front shoulders are going up, the back, hips, and the heads will be going down. Kind of a general thing to follow, so I'll leave that zeroed out. Select my entire character, hit S, middle mouse drag that all the way to frame 25, hit S again, just to make sure 100% that those two frames are locked in. And what we'll do is we'll render this out up to frame 24, and then we'll loop it, and it'll look really nice. So now we should go to our frame 13 and do our opposite passing poses for the front paws here. So this one is pretty much zeroed out, so I can go to all these rotate and translates and zero those out. We want the rotate, which one was that? The rotate Y we want still. There we go. And then obviously need to zero out the toe, or claw control, whichever you want to call it. But we do need to, actually we still needed it to be rotate Y -8, translated Z by -0.2. There we go. And I'll hit S just to make sure everything's set. And then this paw right here is going to be the passing. So I can select this red paw, and then shift select the circle, go to frame 1, right click, copy, then go to 13, highlight the blue box, blue circle, right click, paste, paste. And then as I mentioned before, you just have to fix certain rotations. So this is going to be translated Z +0.2. And then which direction is that? Y will be negative, and X will be negative, and there you go. So now I can highlight everything on frame 13, hit S, and if I kind of flip through these, we've got our main, contact, and passing on the front paws. So now think of what we had halfway in between. For our back paws, halfway in between our back paws were passing, so our front paws will be contact. So we'll go to frame 7, and these front paws will be contacting. And the front shoulder, we're going to rotate that back so it doesn't quite look as broken. Let's say -15. Oops, not 156. There we go. And this front paw is going to be contacting. So we're going to zero out the translate Y, and the rotate X, and the rotate Z. But the rotate Y will bring back our small rotation. Pretty much whatever we had here, 8. So this will be -8. And obviously we need to zero out this toe control. Actually, we'll have a little bit of toe control because it'll just be touching. But we do need to bring this foot forward as far as it'll ever be. So 0.3, give or take. And then lastly, we'll want to adjust this shoulder as well just a tiny bit. So we'll rotate it in the Z direction forward to kind of give a nice bend. Let's say 10 or 15, either way. Maybe 10, that looks a little better. And as I was mentioning about the head bobbing up and down, so here on frame 7, that's not an extreme, but it is halfway between two extremes. So this head will likely be translated, or it will be translated down on 4 and up on 10. So on 7, we might want to favor one of those. So maybe I'll translate it down just a little bit, but that might change later in the graph editor. So I'll select everything on 7, hit S, just to make sure that that's all set. So now we need to work outward for these poses, or the front feet. So we need to do, on 4, this back section is on its extreme down. So on the front, it needs to be on the extreme up. So I'll make sure to select the body, or the front shoulders here first, and I'll rotate it, or I'll translate it up. Let's try just zeroing that out, see how that looks. Yeah, it's subtle, that's good. And the head we'll want to bring down. Let's bring it down, let's just eyeball it, -0.03, sure. Might also rotate it, because we're going to have some rotations in the body here, as we did at the back, how the hips were kind of rotating back. The front hips will also be rotating in the opposite direction. So on 4, we'll rotate it in the Y by, let's say, like 4 or so. But we don't want the cat's head to be kind of waggling back and forth here, so I'll counterbalance that by rotating the head forward in the opposite direction by the same amount, so that it kind of tries to keep its head as much in the same position as it can. So now we need to do our extreme down pose, or extreme up pose rather, for the front paws. So I'll select this blue control, and I'll translate it back halfway in between 1 and 7, which is going to be -0.3 for me. And the nice thing about a lot of this stuff is linear, so if it doesn't look that great at first, that's fine. You can always open up your graph editor later and say, okay, when it's translating X, I need to, it needs to be exactly linear, so once you're in spline, you might delete some of those keys or whatever. But for now, just so we can see all the poses, because steps will only show you what you have keyframed, I'm just kind of throwing in the numbers. And then this red foot will be similar to what we were seeing in the back paw, where we're just going to kind of bring it forward a little bit more, up a little bit, rotate it a little more, just kind of flip back and forth between the two poses and see if that looks good. Just eyeball it. I might even grab that shoulder control and translate it up here. Maybe like 0.06 or 0.07 roughly. And it tends to look a little better, especially with this rig, when you raise that shoulder control there. Alright, so now we got our passing, up, and contact. So now we need our extreme down on frame 10. So I'll make sure to go to frame 4, highlight everything, hit S, go to frame 10. Now we need to do our extreme down. So first I'll grab the main body control. I'll bring it down by not too much, negative 0.03 something, that's fine. And I'll zero out this rotate that I had on the Y, or on the, where was it, 7. Oh yeah, on frame 7 we were supposed to have a rotation. Let's put it at like 4. Maybe 5. Okay. Fixable in the graph editor later. But on 10, it's going to be brought down a little bit, so halfway between 7 and 13, that'll be 2.5. And the shoulder, we'll want to start to soften that up a bit, so I'll just cut it in half, halfway between 7 and 13, which is 5. And then we need to fix this front foot. First of all, the toe control to be zeroed out so that it's planted. And then we'll start to translate this back a little bit. Let's say 0.15. Halfway in between the two keyframes. And this back paw will be back even more, just a bit. Right about there. And of course this shoulder rotation is gonna start to come forward a little bit because it's about to pull off the ground. So let's say like maybe that much. It looks a little hyperextended. So maybe we probably just leave it for now and fix it in the graph editor later. We can kind of figure out the linear movement on part 2 of this video. Alright, so that's our extreme down. So the head will be in its up position here. So we'll grab that head and move it up by not much. 0.02 give or take. But it's also going to rotate this way just a little bit in the Y, so negative 3, maybe negative 2, or rather point. So now we've got our entire first step in blocking, and we shouldn't, now that I remember, shouldn't ignore this center control here. And I noticed on this rig, when you move it just the tiniest bit, the number is ridiculously large. So don't think that you can just come over here and type in a number. Unfortunately, you got to kind of eyeball this. So on, for some reason, it looks like I have a keyframe on frame 2. I'm just going to delete that. But on 1, it's zeroed out. On 4, it's, let's see here. It's probably going to mostly be zeroed out, yeah. And on 7, we're going to lower it just a bit. Oops. There we go. Maybe by whatever that number is, negative 8,800,000,000. And maybe on 4, we start that movement just a little tiny bit. The idea is just to add some kind of organic brightness to it because it'll look better. And on frame 10, it'll start to come up. And on frame 13, it'll be zeroed out, which it is. And then you pretty much just got to start copying our poses forward on the second part of the step. So we'll go through that. So I'm going to select everything just to make sure I'm good to go. Frame 1, S. Frame 4, S. Frame 7, S. 10, S. 13, S. That way I know everything's locked in the way that I want it. And I'm just going to be copying and pasting the rest of the poses, pretty much. So I can go on frame 4, highlight this body, middle mouse drag, go to frame 16, hit S, and change that rotation to be negative in the Y, -4. And then I'll highlight the body again, go to 7, middle mouse drag to 19, hit S, change that rotate Y to -5. Then go to 10, middle mouse drag to 22, hit S, change that -25. So now I can watch that body. There we go, looks good. And we'll do the head real quick. So the head at 4, we'll go to 16, hit S, change that to positive. Go to 7, middle mouse drag to 19, hit S, it's already zeroed out. Go to 10, middle mouse drag to 22, change that to positive. Whatever I had it at, -4, should be +4 on 10 and 22, -4. Okay. Actually, that'll be... we'll fix that in the graph editor. Actually, no, we'll save ourselves the trouble and do it now. So just to recap the head, on 1 it'll be zeroed out. On frame 4, we'll start the rotation. Let's actually go down a little bit to like 2, maybe -2.5. Oops. And on 7, it'll be fully rotated. Let's say -5. 10, it'll be going back, -2.5. And on 13, zeroed out. So 16 will be +5, or rather 2.5, then 5, then 2.5 again, and then 0. So if I hit play, that should look a little better. Yeah, much better. So let's highlight this. We need to do the poses of the paws, and we'll be finished with the blocking for this. Oh, and yes, of course, make sure to save. Looks like I haven't saved the entire time, so save every 10 seconds. You don't want to lose data. Okay. So let's do our extreme up on 16 now. Go to frame 4, and I'll just highlight this red box, shift highlight the red circle, right click, copy, go to 16, highlight the blue box, shift highlight the circle, paste, paste, and then I just have to change the translate Y to be positive, the rotate Y to be negative, and the rotate Z, I think, no, is it the rotate X rather, to be negative. There we go. And then go back to frame 4, highlight the blue box, shift highlight the paw circle, right click copy, go to 16, highlight the red box, shift highlight the red circle, paste, paste, and then just change that translate to negative. There we go. So hopefully you're understanding my process of copying and pasting, and then you just have to change the negative and positive values because there's kind of there's a y-axis right down the middle, so anything on this side is positive, anything on this side is negative, etc. Which is why if you put a positive number on this, it's going to look way far out. Alright, so our next pose is going to be the contact here on frame 19. So we'll go to frame 7. Let's highlight one of these, shift highlight the other, copy, copy, go to frame 19, shift the opposite, or select the opposite foot, paste, paste, change that to negative value there. Alright, back to frame 7, do the opposite foot, copy, 19. Opposite foot, paste, paste. Change that, translate Z to a positive number. And we are on the home stretch here. So our final pose is going to be the extreme down. So on frame 22. So I'll go to frame 10, which is going to be the mirrored pose. Highlight one of these poses, right click, copy. Go to frame 22, select the opposite foot, right click, paste, paste, change that translate Z to a negative for this foot, and then select the other foot, right click, copy, 22, paste, paste, change that to a positive, and I think with that, I think we're done. It looks like there might be a couple hitches because I forgot the, yeah, we can't forget the rotation in the shoulders here. So what we need is, starting on frame 16, we need to bring that forward like we did on frame 4. So we'll rotate that back -5, and then this, oh yeah, we need to bring up this joint up, whatever I had it on 4 for the other, 0.06. And once again, the numbers don't have to be 100%. Frame 7. You can still copy and paste here. So if I select this one, right click, copy, go to 19, highlight the other one, right click, paste, paste. There you go. 7, highlight that one, copy the other one, 19, paste, and paste. I'll go to frame 10, right click, copy, frame 22, highlight the other shoulder, paste. Go back to 10, highlight that one, right click, copy, 22, other one, paste. And I think that should be mostly it. So play yours to make sure that it looks pretty consistent, or even better. Turn off your NURBS curves. Ooh. Notch polygons, and then change this frame range to from 1 to 24, and then I'm going to frame this up properly so I'm nice and zoomed in. Maybe even just go to my side view. Turn off my things again. Then I'm going to right click play blast down here. I'm not going to save the file. And then if you made sure to play blast just from 1 to 24, you can go to view, loop, hit play. We should see the entire thing just looping pretty consistently. So in general, That looks pretty good. It looks like I forgot to animate the midsection on the second half, so we can't forget that. So let's see, on frame 16 it'll probably be zeroed out. Or what do we had on 4? So we'll copy and paste from 4 to 16. Copy and paste from 7 to 19. Copy and paste from 10 to 22. Yeah, there we go. Much better. See how there's almost like a wave in the body? And we can clean up a lot of this stuff in the graph editor in part 2, but for now, just make sure you have all the keyframes set up your play blast. And when you're satisfied, save the play blast, and you're good to go. If you want, you can loop this animation in a few different ways. So one of them, let's say you want to see, you don't want to put it in QuickTime where it's you push loop. You actually want to like maybe move this character in place. I can like triple this frame range or whatever, set it to like 100, and I can select all these keyframes. First of all, make absolutely sure. A habit of mine often is select all the keyframes, go to frame 1, hit S, then push period on your keyboard and it'll jump to the next keyframe, S, period, S, and then I just do that until I make sure that everything's been locked down. But you can shift select all these except for the first frame, because the first is the same as the last frame. Right click, copy, and then go forward to frame 28 here, paste, paste, and then you can do the same thing. Go to frame 52, paste, paste, frame 76, as many times as you want. Now if I hit play, it's just going to repeat those copied frames. And then you can kind of, if you wanted to animate your camera. Now just a quick note on a few things wrong. Not wrong, but so much as need polishing. Other than the obvious, clean up the curves. There are a lot of pops, in particular on this contact pose, or the extreme down pose rather. You'll notice that this back paw feels like it's hyperextended, so we might go in and maybe add a little bit of toe roll just to kind of alleviate that on the down. That's something that you could go in and add that in, but for now I'm not going to worry about it. Also, you could bring back your tail. If you wanted, you could add in some sort of bobbing into the tail, up and down. As I mentioned before, cats' tails kind of have a mind of their own, so just be aware that it's not necessarily wise to say, okay, I'm going to make the tail swing back and forth as the cat's walking, right? Because if we bring back our cat reference, if I can, there it is, actually this one. If you just watch that cat's tail as he's walking, like it doesn't move a whole lot, but then the top kind of twitches, and it just kind of depends. If we go forward, you can see from back here even. So the tail, working in the tail is kind of a whole nother pass altogether. So for now, I would recommend just focusing on this stuff, maybe leaving the tail be. You can figure out that on another time. So that's it for the part 1 of the quadruped walk cycle. Please let me know if you have any questions, and make sure to turn in whatever you have here.